I want to ask you a question. Have you ever struggled in the area of finances or parenting with your spouse? Maybe not seeing eye to eye, couldn't agree on what you were going to do, or maybe even had some serious conflicts, maybe even gotten into some pretty heated fights in those two areas. Well, if you looked at the top answers on the survey, you remember how they used to do in Family Feud? The top two on the survey of what do couples fight about the most is finances and parenting. Yes? So I can relate to that. I've gotten into fights and quarrels and not seen eye to eye in those areas. So does every couple that comes into counseling struggling in one or two of those areas, and probably you have as well. And if you haven't already, don't worry about it. You probably will before it's all over with. You may get through your whole marriage, and then your kids grow up, and then you start arguing about what to do then. I don't know, but I know you're going to argue about it one time or another. So I want to go back and just share with you, before I kind of get into the meat of the subject, kind of give you a picture of my wife's and I's marriage in this area during the first 8 years of our marriage. We've been married a little over 20 now. But during the first 8 years, we had a lot of things going for us. We had a chemistry. We were in love with one another. We did a lot of things, I think, okay, but we were definitely not in sync in this area. And the big thing was we weren't Christians for the first 8 years of our marriage. My wife actually was a Christian early on in her life, and she backslid. And at the time she met me, I was way off track and she was way off track. And we got married. And we started along. And with regard to money, and maybe you can relate to this, we just didn't see eye to eye. It's not like we had major blowouts about it, but when it came to spending, we didn't agree. We always spent more than we made. And the average American family spends $400 more a month than they make? That results in long-term debt. We didn't agree on charging. One of us wanted to charge and thought it was okay, and the other one didn't. Y'all ever experience that? Or we disagreed on the number of charge cards that we should have. We had a number of plastic surgeries in the first 8 years of our marriage. I actually had some of the pieces thrown at me a couple of times as I slept on the couch. Some of you have been there. We argued about what we should spend money on, how much we should spend, whether we should charge. We argued over saving. Actually, we didn't argue over saving. We were in agreement about that. Don't save anything. Spend it all. We thought that we should save, but one of us thought we should save, and the other one, but we didn't save. We weren't good stewards of what we had, and we didn't give anything away. Actually, my wife was a big giver. She's always been a big giver. That's kind of her gift. She loves to give. She has a room in our house filled with gifts to give at one time or another. She buys them throughout the year. She stores them in this room, and then she likes to bless people with them. And it's a wonderful thing to watch now. Back then, I didn't think it was such a wonderful gift. But I'd get on her about her spending habits. But the truth of it is I had double standards. I didn't even know about this wife submit to your husband thing, but I was trying to exert it back then. It's just a natural thing for a man. But the truth of it is it wasn't fair. What I expected of her, I didn't apply it to myself. Y'all ever experienced that one? You say yes, but your spouse says no. They've been living with you. We had some pretty intense fights. And I want to actually show you what our relationship looked like. If you'll turn to figure 6 right after this outline in your workbook. Our relationship kind of looked like this. You see two people there, a husband and a wife, 3 little concentric rings like donuts. We each have a physical body. We each have a soul, which is the mind, the will, and the emotions, and we both have a spirit. We're really a spiritual being with a soul in an earth suit. And because we were both estranged from God, because God was not in our lives really, that we were not Christians at the time, you can see that we were separated from God by sin. You see God the Father up there. Inside of him is love agape and zoe, which is true spiritual life. We had bios, we had biological life, but we did not have spiritual life. We were spiritually dead. Though we were physically alive, we were spiritually dead, separated from God. And our marriage was much conflict. My way versus her way. Our theme song would have been, I did it my way. Our prayer, if we ever did pray, was, God, please change my spouse. Our focus, my focus, I can speak for myself, was to live to please myself. I was very selfish. Life was about what I wanted, what I needed. Life was about the pursuit of happiness, to seek pleasure and to avoid pain. And then if you were to look inside my mind, my will, and my emotions in each of those areas, my mind, I believe the lie. God doesn't mean what he says. He's withholding good from me, and I don't need God. Same lies that were told to Adam and Eve in the garden, same lies that have been continued throughout life, told by the devil, I believed them. My mind was hostile toward God. I needed to be right. My wife needed to be right. We argued over who was right. I relied on my own understanding. I did not trust God. I relied on my own understanding. I had a big ego. You know what ego stands for? Edging God out. God was not in the equation of my life and my decision process. My mind was conformed to this world. What about my will? There's an expression in the AA program, in the 12-step program, self-will run riot. They know what that means. That's where many of them were before they cleaned up and sobered up. There's self-will run riot, causing chaos in your life. You're powerless. Your life is unmanageable. I was operating independently of God and independently of my spouse, and she was operating independently of God and independently of me. We were not in sync. Our decisions, my decisions were based on my feelings and circumstances, not on a value system. It was my way versus my spouse's way, and it was a battle for control. Who was going to be in control? Can you relate? Our emotions, there was great emphasis on my feelings. My feelings dictated my actions. Love was a feeling, eros or phileo. May remember some of that from previous lessons. I was fine. Really, if you ask me, I was fine. Fine stands for fearful, insecure, neurotic, and empty. And so is my wife fine. Someone asks you, how are you? You say, fine. Fearful, insecure, neurotic, and empty. And that was us. We were not in sync. God was not a part of our life. We had conflict. We argued. We didn't see eye to eye. And what I would tell you is that's where a lot of couples are. You know what I say? Life is hard enough. Life, if you have everything going right with your spouse, life is hard enough. To deal with kids and finances and your job and the stresses of life and the world and the devil. You're going through life, you know, you get up early in the morning. You scurry around trying to get ready, the average person, not the Christian that has a devotion time. They get up late. They hit the snooze button. They get up late. They don't have enough time with the kids. The kids act out because they don't give them any attention. You try to make breakfast. You're yelling and screaming, trying to get in and out of the bathroom. You know, do your hair, get the lunch. You know, put the load of clothes in that's hanging on the you know, right there in the middle of the bathroom floor. And you know, you're seeing all this and you're aggravated. You go to work. You go to work and you're stressed out at work for 10 hours. Sometimes you get home, one of you's got to pick up one of the kids here, the other one picks up the other kid there. Somebody gets home. Whose job is it to cook? I have no idea if both people are working, but usually it falls on the woman. She's trying to throw a meal together. Sometimes you pick up fast food. Whatever, you get home, then you got to do homework with the kids. And then, you know, you're fighting through that, and then you got to make dinner, get the kids to eat, get them bathed, you know, do the homework, and then clean up after yourself, or you got a mound in the morning to deal with, or it just keeps piling up. And then, you know, you finally get the kids to bed after you fight with them, unless your kids are the ones that stay up until you stay up, or they're in the bed with you, and that's a whole nother turmoil. Boy, I saw some jabs on that one. And then you plop into bed at the end of the night for a romantic hours interlude with your spouse. You're right. You wonder why there's no romance. We're going to have meaningful conversation and foreplay at 9:30 or 10 o'clock after we've been at this thing called life. And then, you get to the weekend, and some people work on Saturday. You want to sleep in, but you have to fight over who's going to sleep in. Who's going to get up with the kids? And then there's chores. Then you got to do the chores that you didn't have time. There's grocery shopping. You got to do that. You got to run errands. You got to do the yard. And then on Sunday, if you're not a Christian, that the guy thinks that Saturday and Sunday is hobby time. The woman thinks it's family time. Do you argue about that? Y'all with me? Y'all, life is hard enough. I haven't even talked about any problems. This is just normal life. We haven't gotten into you have marital problems or problems with one of your children. This is normal life. It's difficult. You add some problems on that, like alcohol or drug addiction or infidelity or communication problems or problems with your parenting or problems with money problems or problems with the in-laws, and you got a royal fiasco mess. It's difficult. Life is difficult enough with us pulling in opposite directions. We need to be together. We need to be working together to even have a chance at dealing with this thing called life. I heard someone share this. You ever see those strongman competitions, where the guys, these big macho guys, try to pull this dead weight? Well, they have one of those for horses. I think they had some Clydesdales or these big horses. They were in this competition, and they had these two horses competing in the finals, and one horse pulled 9 tons of dead weight, and the other horse pulled 8 tons of dead weight. So the one with 9 tons won the competition. But then they wanted to see, they were just curious, if they put the horses together, how much weight could they pull together, hooked up with one of those yokes. And you would theorize that they would pull 8 times 9, 8 plus 9, which is 17 or 18 or so. But do you know that they actually pulled 22 pounds working together? That the total of what they pulled was greater than the sum of its parts. That there's a power in working together. And you know what? Similarly, can you imagine if they were yoked up and they were pulling in different directions? They wouldn't even be able to pull the amount that the one pulled. They wouldn't even be able to pull 8. They wouldn't hardly be able to pull anything. And that's how it is in marriage when couples are not working together. Well, Michelle and I were not working together. So then 8 years into our marriage, we go to this convention, and I hear the gospel shared by this businessman, and I respond and receive Jesus Christ as my Savior. My wife is convicted. She had been being convicted, trying to get me to church, but the Spirit of the Lord, pulled her forward, and she rededicated her life to Christ. And we both surrendered our lives to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And you know what? A lot of things started to get better all around. But, as sometimes happens, and they don't tell you this when you sign the decision card, you think everything is going to get really better when you give your life to Christ. Everything in my life crashed after I gave my life to Christ. For the next 3 years, Dad died of cancer. My daughter got pregnant out of wedlock. Our finances just went down the tubes. 2 businesses we had. We had my counseling business where we were working together, and we had another business that we had started to try to get rich quick. And when you work together, if you have weaknesses in your relationship, those weaknesses are going to be exposed tremendously because it puts a pressure on the relationship. So some of our weak areas were already being exposed. Then our finances began to go down the tubes. And so it magnified the weaknesses even further. We had reduced finances, less than we had before, and I told you we were spending everything we had. And then we had mounting debt. And within 2 years of the conversion that I had, we were right in the middle of a 3-year-long intense wilderness experience. And some of y'all know what that means. We were in tremendous debt. We were broke. We were just really struggling, and we were both going through a crisis of faith. God was really dealing with us and working on us, me especially. I want you to check out what Jesus says in Mark chapter 3, verse 24 and 25. They should have it on the monitor there. Jesus said, if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom will not be able to stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. My house was crashing. Michelle and I weren't together. Even after we became Christians, our problems and our disunity in certain areas of our life just didn't clear up like that. A lot of times people give their lives to Christ, but all the problems in their life don't just clear up. There were some things that needed to change. And our family, our house was crashing, and I believe the truth of it is God was allowing it to crash so that we would put Him first, so that we would get our act together and deal with the things we needed to deal with. No business or athletic team could succeed if its main partners or players were not aligned. And neither can you in marriage. Jesus also said, and you may be familiar with this, in Mark chapter 10, verse 9, 6 through 9, this is not up on the monitor, and he quotes Genesis 2:24. You're familiar with the verse. He said, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Jesus actually talks about 3 things that are necessary to have a successful marriage. What are they? You must leave mom and dad. Now let that sink in. In Southwest Louisiana, sometimes it's a virtual impossibility. You must leave your father and mother. Now, I didn't have a lesson on that. I have a chapter in my book. Chapter 10 is entitled Leaving Mom and Dad. If that's an issue for you, read and meditate on that chapter and do the work in there. Okay? You must leave mom and dad. The second thing is you shall cleave to your spouse. In the old wedding vows, when they said for better or worse and rich or poor, they used to have a phrase in there that said forsaking all others. In other words, everyone else becomes secondary. I choose my spouse. They take the position of preeminence in my life under God. They're number one. More important than my mama, more important than my daddy, more important than my children, more important than my boss, more important than my friends. They're number one. I cleave to my spouse. And the third thing, he says, and they shall become one flesh. The third thing you have to do is become one. And listen, becoming one is a lot more than saying I do, signing your name to a contract and having sex. It's a lot more than that. Yes? It involves sharing yourself with your spouse, submitting yourselves one to another. You remember that? Considering their feelings and needs in all circumstances, cooperating, sacrificing, dying to yourself and starting to see yourself as a unit, as we rather than me. When you get married, you cease to be me and you become a we. That's one of the hardest things that some people have to deal with, especially men when they're in their early 20s. They have a real hard time with that. Some of you are nodding. I'm married to one of them. So my question is, how in practical terms does a couple become one? How do they learn to operate as one? What do you and your mate do to do that? Now look on your outline again. And the first question there is, how do we actually function as one? And you can fill in the blanks there spiritually, physically, and psychologically. Because man is 3 parts, body, mind, and spirit. So how do you function as one spiritually? When my wife and I gave our lives to Christ, we were joined to Christ's body. We were literally placed in his body. We became one in the body of Christ. And also we were joined by his Spirit in a holy bond of matrimony. We become one spiritually. Second, B under number 1, is how do we function as one physically? Well, when we have sex, when we have sexual intercourse after we get married, you consummate the marriage through that act. There's a shedding of blood if it's the first time, and that consummates the covenant of marriage. It's a very sacred thing. But it's not just that. When we become married, it's like what's mine becomes my spouse's, and what's my spouse's becomes mine. Yours becomes mine, and mine becomes yours. Everything that I have gets put in a pot, and everything that she has gets put in a pot. We're one. Children, possessions, everything. Then C, how do we actually function as one psychologically? Mind, will, and emotions. That's the soul. You can put in parentheses soul, and the soul is comprised of the mind, the will, and the emotions.